This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Paul Hansen. Thurley Ruxton by Philip Verrill Mighels. Chapter 48. A Climax. The something boyishly honest in the Duke, a charming quality that Thurley had previously enjoyed, beset her now as she forced him candidly, resolved to win him to the plan that she felt would make for the happiness of all. He was dressed as colonel of the Baron's regiment von Seydlitz, and was splendid and good to see. She found the matter difficult in the light of his repeated protestations that he would not return to Herzegovina without her, and that kingdoms were hateful in his sight. "You see, you haven't been fair," she said, smiling to take away the sting. "When you knew I was not the princess, but the merest no one in America, you treated me quite as if you had never met your fiancé, and were ready to let me think you thought me she. You'll admit to me now that you knew it all from the first." He nodded. "And that I was your slave also from the first." She laughed at his gravity. "But nobody wants a little cheat." "It is true, yet everybody wants a little princess." "But I'm not." "But you are." "Oh, you're wasting such a lot of time," she declared. "I just know you're ashamed of the way you're treating Princess Thurvinia. I know that deep in your heart of hearts your sense of duty to your country cries out as love could never cry, that you know you must go, and you wish to go and take the princess with you as your bride. I shouldn't like you in the least if you were any other way, and you want me to like you a little." "O God of love," he answered, as only a tragic youth may answer, "but surely you can like me a little for myself?" She was very much in earnest. "Not a particle if you abandon your affianced princess, your distracted kingdom, or the nobler self I wish so much to admire." "But I love you," he protested. "Is that nothing?" "No," she laughed, "it's a nuisance to everyone but me. But the love of a man who deserts his country and his honour, oh!" His sense of shame, only a little narcotised by the brilliance and appeal of her beauty, struggled in his heart. "But, Princess, I am helpless," he declared. "What can I do?" "Shake hands and say good bye," she answered readily. "Promise you'll make your genuine princess happy, and serve your land, and let me call the Baron here and tell him how greatly I admire you." "The Baron?" he echoed. "He is not here." "Of course," said Thurley. "I wrote him to come. I'll ask him now." Her sentence was never completed. A glare of blinding light that penetrated the window's thickest curtains flashed from without in the snow-bound park, a terrifying detonation, shattering glass and rocking the house, instantly followed with a jar and a shock as if some world disaster. Shrieks and screams from the avenue, someone's cry within the building, and a heterogeneous medley of alarms arose on the second of lull that followed the thud and impact of the explosion. Then the door was flung open, and Alice was there, wild-eyed and gasping, horrified by the dreadful things she had fully expected to discover in the room where Thurley had been left. "Dearie!" she cried. "Oh, thank God! I thought—" "Carl!" cried a voice of the Baron at his heels, and he ran in after Alice, as certain as she that here in this room a dynamite bomb had been fired. "What was it?" cried Thurley, abruptly possessed of a dread that seemed to cast her back to her recent frights and perils. "What has happened?" "Oh, I thought I should die before I could reach the door," said Alice, pale and fearfully shaken. "It must have been out in the street. The Baron had hastened at once to the window. Wank had been instantly ordered outside to see what might be done. "Ah, in the park," said Hotchhouse, enormously relieved, and the others hastened to see. A crowd had gathered in the street below with promptness truly amazing. A swarming, excited mass of beings it was, with men swiftly running from all directions, and cabs, automobiles, and buses congregating in the dark, congested throng. It was all half lighted only by the street lamps gleaming through the trees. In the snow of the park the Congress had its centre, and Wank, escaping from the turgid eddy of beings, came hastening back to report. "Pelegrin," he said to his chief at once, and Thurley nearly sank where she stood. Some way the creature, with a gas pipe engine of death and destruction in his hand, had exploded his horrible implement prematurely, there at the wall of the frozen park, on his way to cross the avenue and enter Alice's basement. The Duke was grey as ashes. "My God, what I should bring on this house," he said, and Thurley, dimly hearing, understood. They were spared a detailed account of the mangled form across the crowded thoroughfare, but of fright they could not be relieved. The Baron, the Duke, and Wank at length departed. Karl Wilhelm matured in his manhood and resolution suddenly by the shock to his nerves and his heart. He took the time for one long look of gravity into Thurley's eyes, while her fearless gaze met his own. "You have already taught me my duty, believe me," he said, his face strangely hardened at that of a man. "I trust I shall always merit a little of your admiration, Princess Thurley." He raised his hand to his lips, kissed it reverently, and retreated backward from the room. Late that night, when Thurley looked down on the avenue and park, at last once more deserted, only a great gaping orifice, where snow and earth and rock had been, marked the spot of Pelegrin's last venture. Then Alice came in, still white and quaking, dressed for retiring, but too disturbed for bed. Dear child," she said as she came and took her princess in her arms. "No more of my innocent game. I release you from every single promise." Thurley looked at her unwinkingly, afraid it meant that, the game being done, she was due to be dismissed and return hence she had come. "No more?" she said. You won't need me any longer?" "For Heaven's sake, dearie, what do you mean?" demanded Alice, equally disturbed. "Need you? I never needed any one so much in all my life. I simply intended to release you from all the foolish agreements I exacted. I realize the dangers I have plunged you in. I realize how selfish I should be, after all you've undergone, to deny you the slightest speck of happiness. That's all. If you wish to marry Acton Gaylord—" "Alice!" cried Thurley, all but ready to laugh, despite the tragic outcome of the evening. "Marry Acton Gaylord? Well, you lent him your money, and—" "Oh, I'll get it all back and return it to you gladly," interrupted Thurley, who had troubled her mind without respite over all the things she had done. "I didn't realize it was not really mine to give. I wanted him to beat the Count, and he did. I acted impulsively, of course, I know, but I'll surely restore every cent I used in—" "Thurley Ruxton, what are you talking about, you silly little thing?" demanded Alice, unable to let her continue further. "That money was just as much yours as the hair on your head. You ought to be spanked to treat me so." But with tears in her eyes she clasped the girl against her breast, and strained her there with all her strength. "You know that I love you. You know I approve of every single thing you've done at last. If you wish to marry Mr. Gaylord, I know that some way he must be splendid." "But I don't," objected Thurley. "I don't see why you ever thought I could." Alice pushed herself away and looked her squarely in the eyes. "I'm a kitten under 9 days old," she said. "Maybe you'd rather not marry anyone at all." Thurley suddenly crimsoned, but the light in her eyes increased. "I admit it would have been awfully sweet to let Robley ask me, riding that morning in the snow," she said, "but I wanted to keep the promise made to you." Alice's eyes were abruptly brimming. "You poor, dear, darling little girl," she said, attempting to laugh, but achieving something nearer to a sob. "Let me call him up on the phone." End of chapter 48. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Paul Hansen. Thurley Ruxton by Verrill Mighels. Chapter 49. A Trysting Place. The telephone was not disturbed that night. A mere metal wire has frequently warmed and tingled at the voice of Cupid speeding down its length, but Thurley had plans that were all her own, as well as a number of things to say that took no account of instruments that rendered distance between the principals obligatory. Sometime late that Friday night Gotham weather changed. A warm wind drifting a tropical temperature from Tampa to the bleakness of New England wrapped all the world of Manhattan in its voluptuous embrace and melted the snow from its bosom. The morning broke with crystal clearness, the sun all gold in a turquoise sky, and the summery breeze now languidly puffing at eddying pools of melted snow till they withered and floated away. The only mar in all the perfect morning was supplied by the city newspapers. Their accounts of the end of the miserable Pelivan, almost unanimously pronounced a Black Hand agent whose plot had judiciously miscarried, served to reawaken fears already sufficiently sleepless. But youth is retentive of joys and hopes where alarms find but temporary lodgment. Thurley was young, and her heart was too full of her own excitement to permit large room for dreads. She passed the morning in a constant succession of fevers and doubts, concerned alone with Robley Stuyvesant. But leaning on Alice for assistance was enormously sustaining, for Alice certainly helped. It was she who telephoned at last to Stuyvesant when the psychological moment had arrived. That was at 2 in the afternoon. "Just called you up to relieve your mind and set a misconception straight," she told him cheerily. "That loan, you know, of 30,000 to a certain individual. It was the prettiest two-edged stroke I've seen for an age. Yes, it floored a certain count and paralyzed its recipient like 1,000,000 volts coming from a hairpin. No, I'll tell you all about it later. Why, I'm trying to inform you delicately. She did it because she wanted to squelch them both. Yes, I thought perhaps you'd like to know where to find her." "No, she isn't here." "I don't know exactly where she is myself. Now, listen intently. She said she was going over in the park to some wonderfully romantic spot where someone broke his wrist one day, but for what earthly reason is more than a mortal could guess. Now wait, don't hurry. Robley." But there was silence on the wire. Thurley, at a little past the hour of 2, was seated alone on that particular bench she had one day occupied when all the world, though clothed in the splendours of its autumn gold and crimson, was a grey and desolate perspective so far as she could discern its wide expanse. Today the sun obliquely slanted on denuded trees and on grass down-beaten and sodden from the recent snow, as well as on roads that here, in the sections of the park unfavoured by the pomp and glory of wealth, were practically deserted. Yet gleams of the world's most refulgent light seemed beckoning on all her far horizon, and though she still had doubts and tremors interspersed with all her hopes, the prospect seemed a verdant field of flowers and rills and song. A plump grey squirrel, bright-eyed, cosy in his furs, and confident of friendship from the whole human tribe, came inquiringly up to halt at Thurley's feet and beg for alms to crack. He tucked first one, then the other of his tiny paws in the muff of his little breasts, gazing at her appealingly and flirting the banner of his tail. "Hullo," said Thurley, "if I'd only thought to bring a bag of peanuts." Her hungry little visitor leaped upon the bench, came fearlessly up to walk across her lap, poke his active little nose against the glove on her hand, then leaped again to the earth and weather-trampled sod, where he took up a search for hidden treasures. Thurley had turned to watch him when the faint distant purring of a motor car spun her about on the seat. Stuyvesant came round the bend, holding the wheel as best he might, with a wrist still unequal to the task. The colour leaped to Thurley's cheeks like rose leaves tossed upward in a zephyr. Then the car was halted, and Stuyvesant rose to leap out over his extra tires, as he had done on the first occasion. "Oh, don't try that!" cried Thurley, her old impulsive self immediately uppermost as she sprang to her feet and ran a little toward the car. "Please don't break anything more." He laughed despite the depth of emotions in his breast, alighting quite intact. She stood in the road to meet him, and gave him her hand as he came there, doffing his cap. "You know I don't like threes exactly," she added, "if it means 3 injuries or anything like that." "I wonder if you'll ever meet me here again," he answered, as they turned to go to her bench. "That's the sort of threes I hope for, the threes with nothing but charms. But they might not be that kind, after all," she faltered, resuming the seat she had occupied. "It's so easy these days for folks to be deceived, to deceive themselves and everything." He sat beside her and leaned a little forward. His face was inclined to paleness again. His eyes were intensely serious. "I think I have deceived myself for the final time, concerning some few things at least," he said, referring to his errors of judgment respecting Gaylord and her loan. "I hope today may render possible some final understandings." His earnestness a little disconcerted the happiness of spirit she had instantly conceived at his coming. She could only infer that he had come upon truths he found not altogether pleasant. "I have never wished to deceive you for a moment," she said. "I made up my mind to tell you everything, absolutely everything, today." It was Stuyvesant's turn to be surprised and puzzled. "Everything? You mean about your duties to Hertsegotha? Wait, please, before you answer. This may be perhaps our final little talk together, our last sunbright experience after the fates had seemed. I only wish to say that on the morning when we drove together through the snow, I spoke unguardedly. The stress of the moment, everything conspired to wring that declaration from my lips, and yet her heart was sinking. You didn't mean it." She tried to smile as the sunlight seemed about to vanish. "I have come here to confess and sue for pardon together," he told her, holding her gaze to his own with ties grown sacred and irresistible. "I love you, Princess, despite my utmost wish and sense of the hopeless plight into which I am plunged. I shall love you always, even though I have no right, even although you bid it cease, for its haunting echo in your after years. I would give my life to serve you. I would almost give it for this moment here, ours, all ours, so long as it may last. And if you find this quite beyond your pardon, nevertheless my love shall live, for none save God could make it die. And yet I hope for your pardon." She had closed her eyes and leaned a little back in the sweetness and marvellous ecstasy. She had no power at the moment to deny her heart, which had yearned and ached for his words. After a moment of silence and intensity, he added, "I'm not to be forgiven?" "Oh, don't say that," she begged him suddenly. "It is I who must beg forgiveness. But I came to tell you all, every little thing, that I am not a princess, that I am nothing in the world but just—" "Not a princess?" he interrupted suddenly, catching at her hand, which he held with a pressure that hurt and crushed, yet sent mad gladness to her heart. "Not Princess Thurvinia, not—" "Oh, no, no, no," she cried, "but I never claimed I was. Alice never claimed it. We just let the rumour go. I don't know why we did it. We never realised what dreadful things might happen, what serious consequences." "Thurley, thank God," he broke in, wildly joyous, unspeakably relieved. "I have a right to love you then, to love you and love you and love you." She suddenly sprang to her feet to avoid the madness of his wooing. "But wait," she cried, "I've got to tell you all. I am no one in the world. I don't belong in your social sphere. I'm only what Alice has made me. Now you can take it all back if you like." She had never been braver, never more beautiful, honest, splendid in all her changeful career. She faced him frankly, her wonderful courage and candour shining in her eyes with a light of love she feared at that moment must be for ever hopeless. "Little heart," he said, his utterance singularly soft and charged with tenderness, "you are my little princess, my glorious little queen. You are what the gods have made you, my Thurley, the noblest, sweetest little woman in the world." She sank on the bench weakly, her eyes abruptly filled. "Oh, Robbie, don't say it, please," she begged, "if you ever want to take it back again." He sank on his knees, despite all sense of time and place, and kissed her hand. "Comrade," he said, "beloved." He drove the car when at last they knew they must return to her avenue home. They were alone at last in the room where so many emotions had run their course. She came to him simply, such a wealth of love overbrimming her eyes, that Robley's senses lifted away from all the things of earth. He held her passionately in his arms, while her own arms stole about his neck. Then they took and gave that wondrous kiss of glory. End of chapter 49. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Paul Hansen. Thurley Ruxton by Philip Verrill Mighels. Chapter 50. Princess Thurley. The social triumph of Alice Van Kirk was in no wise diminished when at length the truth concerning Princess Thurvinia was known throughout the length and breadth of Swelldom. Thurley had gained rather than lost admiring hosts, and the natural interest excited was increased. The dinner that Alice had long planned was the season's social masterpiece. The holidays were spent away from town, where Robley and Thurley, like two young striplings from the Pantheon before the pagan gods and goddesses had lost their pristine charm, found new delights and new relations with the earth and stars in the wonder of their love. A brilliant procession of social events marched through the weeks as they sped. The recent past, with its doubts and fears, its excitements, intrigues, and startling evolutions, was gliding away on the placid sea of memory, when one more echo rolled across from far Herzegovina, where the young Grand Duke, with a bride resembling Thurley Ruxton, had succeeded to the throne. It came in the name of their Majesties, but bore the signature of Baron von Hochhaus, whose personal letter was attached. In recognition of invaluable services to Princess Thurvinia, to the kingdom of Herzegovina, and to Karl Wilhelm Hermann, King by the grace of God, and in the name and with the love of an appreciative and perpetually grateful people, was the reading of the part of the message which described a modest but glorious girl as defender of Her Majesty the Queen, and a princess by special appointment of Heaven. It was a triple recognition. There was first the scroll, a gold-laid, massive, impressive document denoting the extraordinary service rendered, then in partial liquidation of the state's indebtedness, a gift of $250,000, and finally a medal and full decoration of the Royal Legion of Courage. But the last little contribution, which succeeded in quite overwhelming the heart of the princess by appointment of Heaven, was the merest unofficial scrawl from the big proportioned little baron. I trust the love of an old man, fond in his own poor personal capacity, may likewise be accepted. There was much that was golden and marvellously sweet to gaze back upon and wonder, as Thurley and Robley, at the stern of a great Atlantic liner, watched all America, green with coming spring, dip slowly down in the purple sea and disappear behind the earth's rotundity. There was much that was splendid and dream-fulfilling for them both to contemplate, far out to the east, where an older world would rise from the sea above the rounded bulk of ocean. But most of all, and greater than all, was the world of limitless space and inexpressible splendour that the two beheld when they looked again in each other's eyes. A honeymoon day from the trophies, spiced with the fragrances of far-off Yucatan, was wafting lazily by. Thurley smiled as she gazed at the sun splash in the water. "Is it too soon yet," she said, "to ask where I am going to be taken?" To motor through Egypt first," he answered happily, "then all about the continent, and perhaps to Herzegovina." She clung to his arm and leaned upon his shoulder, closing her eyes on the sheer delight she had no words to express. Like the prince in the tale, he leaned in rapture and kissed her on the lips. But to all the world of love and ecstasy, the princess was already wide awake. The end of Thurley Ruxton by Philip Verrill Mighels, read by Paul Hanson.